The dust on Elijah Carter's boots had barely settled when he knelt beside the grave marked Sarah Catherine Carter, beloved wife, 1845 to 1873. And he knew this Sunday ritual would define him for as long as his heart still beat. The wildflowers he clutched in his weathered hands were desert marigolds, the same golden blooms Sarah had loved when they first settled in Tombstone, Arizona Territory, back in 1871. 2 years had passed since consumption stole her from him. 2 years of Sundays walking the same dirt path to Boot Hill Cemetery. 2 years of speaking to cold earth instead of warm lips. Elijah was 31 years old, but grief had carved lines around his eyes that made him look a decade older. He worked as a ranch hand at the Double K spread just outside town, spending his days breaking horses and mending fences, his nights staring at the empty space beside him in bed. "Brought you the marigolds again, Sarah," he said softly, arranging the flowers against her headstone. The October morning was crisp, the Arizona sun just beginning to warm the desert air. "Had a rough week with that black stallion. Reminded me of Thunder, remember him? Took us both to break him, but you always had the gentler touch." He talked to her about everything, the mundane details of his week spilling out like water from a cracked canteen. Other folks in Tombstone thought him strange, the cowboy who spent every Sunday morning in the cemetery, but Elijah did not care what they thought. This ritual was all he had left of the life they had planned together. When he finally stood, his knees protesting from kneeling on the hard ground, the sun was higher in the sky. He touched the top of her headstone one last time before walking back toward town, his shadow stretching long across the graves. The weeks turned into months, and still Elijah came every Sunday without fail. Through the mild winter of 1875 and into the warming days of spring 1876, he brought flowers and conversation to Sarah's resting place. The other graves around hers received visitors too, but none as constant as Elijah. The groundskeeper, old Mr. Hutchins, sometimes nodded to him in passing, a silent acknowledgement of his devotion. It was a Sunday in late April when everything changed. Elijah approached Sarah's grave as usual, carrying a bunch of desert lupines he had found blooming near the San Pedro River. But he stopped short when he saw someone already there, a figure in a dark blue dress kneeling beside a grave 3 plots over from Sarah's. The woman had rich auburn hair pinned up beneath a simple bonnet, and her shoulders shook with quiet sobs. He hesitated, not wanting to intrude on her grief, but his path took him directly past her position. As he walked carefully by, trying not to disturb her, she looked up suddenly, and he found himself staring into the greenest eyes he had ever seen, rimmed red from crying. "I apologize," she said quickly, wiping at her cheeks with a handkerchief. "I did not mean to be in your way." "You are not in my way, miss," Elijah said, removing his hat respectfully. "I am just paying my respects, same as you." She nodded and turned back to the grave before her, which read Captain James Morrison, 1838 to 1876. The earth was still fresh, the marker clearly new. Elijah continued to Sarah's grave and knelt, but he found himself distracted, aware of the crying woman nearby. He arranged his flowers and spoke his usual words to Sarah, but kept them briefer than normal. When he stood to leave, the woman was still there, her hands folded in her lap, staring at the grave with an expression of such profound sadness that it stirred something in his chest he thought had died with Sarah. The next Sunday she was there again. This time she was not crying, but sitting quietly beside Captain Morrison's grave with a small bundle of flowers, white and yellow daisies. Elijah nodded to her as he passed, and she nodded back, a flicker of recognition in those green eyes. The Sunday after that, she arrived just as he was finishing his visit with Sarah. As they passed each other on the path, she spoke. "You come every week," she said. It was not quite a question. "Yes, ma'am," Elijah replied. "My wife, 2 years now. I am sorry for your loss." Her voice was soft but steady, with a slight accent he could not quite place. Eastern, perhaps, educated. "And I for yours," he said, gesturing toward the captain's grave. "Your husband." "My brother," she corrected. "He was all the family I had left." They stood there on the path for a moment, two grieving souls in a cemetery full of ghosts. Then she extended her hand. "Meredith Morrison," she said. "Elijah Carter." Her hand was small in his, but her grip was firm. After that, they often crossed paths on Sundays. Sometimes they spoke, brief exchanges about the weather or the flowers they had brought. Other times they simply nodded and went about their separate rituals. Elijah found himself looking forward to these encounters more than he cared to admit, and sometimes he caught himself arriving at the cemetery a bit earlier, hoping to see her. It was mid-June when Meredith was not there on Sunday, and Elijah felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. He completed his visit with Sarah, telling her about a particularly ornery mare he had been working with, and was about to leave when he noticed that Captain Morrison's grave had no flowers. He stood there for a long moment, debating with himself. Then, almost without conscious decision, he walked back down the hill toward town, purchased a second small bundle of flowers from Mrs. Chen's garden shop and returned to place them on the captain's grave. "For your sister," he said to the headstone. "She must have had cause to miss this week." The following Sunday, Meredith was there, and she approached him directly as he knelt beside Sarah's grave. "Mr. Carter," she said, and he looked up to find her standing with her hands clasped in front of her, a nervous energy in her posture. "I wanted to thank you for the flowers you left for James last week. Mrs. Chen mentioned you had purchased them." Elijah stood, brushing dirt from his knees. "It was nothing, Miss Morrison. I noticed you were not here and thought your brother should not go without." "I was ill," she explained. "Nothing serious, just a fever that kept me abed for a few days. But it troubled me greatly to miss my visit, and then to arrive this week and see that someone had thought of James anyway." Her voice caught slightly. "It was a great kindness." "We all need kindness in our grief," Elijah said simply. Meredith looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. "Would you care to take a walk, Mr. Carter? I find I could use the company, if you do not mind." They walked through the cemetery together, an odd intimacy forming between two people bound by loss. Meredith told him about her brother, how James had been a captain in the cavalry, stationed at nearby Fort Huachuca before his discharge. He had died from complications of an old war wound that had never properly healed. "He was a good man," she said. "Stubborn as a mule, but good. He brought me out here from Philadelphia 2 years ago, said the dry air would be better for his health than the damp east. I suppose he was wrong about that." "And now you are alone in Tombstone," Elijah observed. "I have employment," she said. "I teach at the schoolhouse. It keeps me occupied, gives me purpose. But yes, I am alone." Elijah understood that feeling more than he could express. Over the following weeks, their Sunday encounters grew longer, evolving from brief exchanges to genuine conversations. They began walking through town together after their cemetery visits, sometimes stopping for coffee at the Grand Hotel dining room, sometimes just strolling down Allen Street while Tombstone came to life around them. Elijah learned that Meredith was 28 years old, well-educated, and fiercely independent despite her grief. She had been teaching for 5 years and loved working with children, though she admitted the roughness of Tombstone was quite different from the refined schools of Philadelphia. She read voraciously, loved music, though she had no piano to play, and had a sharp wit that surprised him into laughter more than once. Meredith learned that Elijah had come west from Missouri in 1870 with Sarah, both of them seeking adventure and a fresh start. He was skilled with horses, patient and gentle where others were harsh. He had wanted children, but Sarah's health had always been fragile, and then she was gone before they had the chance. He rarely smiled, but when he did, it transformed his entire face. "You loved her very much," Meredith said one Sunday in late July as they sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree near the cemetery. It was not a question, but Elijah answered anyway. "With everything I had," he said. "When she died, I thought the best part of me died too. But you are still here," Meredith said gently. "Still living, still working, still bringing flowers every Sunday. Because I do not know how to do anything else." Meredith was quiet for a moment, then said, "James used to tell me that the dead do not want us to stop living. He said it after our parents passed, when I wanted to lock myself away from the world. He insisted I keep teaching, keep engaging with life even when it hurt. I was angry with him for it then, but I think he was right." Elijah looked at her, at the way the dappled sunlight played across her face, at the strength and sadness mingled in her green eyes. Something stirred in his chest, something he had not felt since Sarah's death. It was not quite guilt, but close enough to make him uncomfortable. "I should go," he said abruptly, standing. "I have work at the ranch tomorrow, need to prepare." If Meredith was hurt by his sudden departure, she did not show it. She simply nodded and watched him walk away, her expression thoughtful. Elijah stayed away from the cemetery the following Sunday. He told himself he needed to work on a section of fence that had come loose, that he could not spare the time this week. But the truth was more complicated and more frightening. He was developing feelings for Meredith Morrison, feelings that seemed like a betrayal of Sarah's memory. He spent that Sunday mending fence, and trying not to think about green eyes and auburn hair, about conversations that made him feel alive again. He tried not to wonder if Meredith had noticed his absence, if she was disappointed or relieved. On Monday afternoon, he was in the corral working with a young gelding when one of the ranch hands called out that he had a visitor. Elijah looked up to see Meredith Morrison standing by the fence, still in her teaching clothes, a determined set to her jaw. "Miss Morrison," he said, approaching her and removing his hat. "This is a surprise. You were not at the cemetery yesterday," she said without preamble. "I had work to do." "Do not lie to me, Mr. Carter. You come every Sunday without fail, rain, or shine for 2 years. What changed?" Elijah looked at her, at the challenge in her eyes, and found he could not dissemble. "You changed," he said quietly. Meredith's expression softened. "I see, and that frightens you." "It feels wrong," Elijah admitted, "like I am being unfaithful to Sarah's memory. May I tell you something?" Meredith asked, stepping closer to the fence. "When James was dying, truly dying in those last days, he made me promise him something. He made me promise I would not spend my life mourning him, that I would find happiness again, even if it meant leaving his grave untended sometimes." Her voice wavered slightly but held firm. "I was angry at him for asking that of me, but now I think I understand. He did not want me to be chained to grief." "What are you saying?" Elijah asked, though he thought he knew. "I am saying that I believe the people we have lost would want us to live, truly live, not just exist in the shadow of our grief. And I am saying that I have come to value our Sundays together, value your company and your kindness, and I was disappointed when you were not there." Elijah's heart hammered in his chest. "Meredith, I do not know if I can be what you deserve. I am just a cowboy with more scars than prospects." "And I am just a schoolteacher far from home," Meredith replied. "But perhaps we could be those things together, and it would be enough." The young gelding snorted and tossed his head, breaking the tension of the moment. Elijah looked at the horse, then back at Meredith, and made a decision that both terrified and exhilarated him. "Would you like to see the ranch?" he asked. "I could show you what I do, introduce you to the horses." Meredith's smile was like sunrise. "I would like that very much." She came back the following week and the week after that. Elijah showed her the horses he was training, taught her how to approach them gently, how to read their body language. Meredith was a quick learner, unafraid of the large animals but respectful of their power. In turn, she invited him to dinner at her small house near the schoolhouse, served him food she had cooked herself, and played for him on the old piano her neighbors allowed her to use. They still went to the cemetery every Sunday, but now they went together, bringing flowers for both Sarah and James, speaking to the dead they had loved before walking back into the world of the living. Slowly, carefully, like two wounded creatures testing their ability to trust again, they drew closer. It was a warm evening in September when Elijah kissed her for the first time. They were sitting on her porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, and Meredith had just finished telling him a humorous story about one of her students. She laughed, her whole face lighting up with joy, and Elijah found he could not resist any longer. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, but she did not. Their lips met softly, tentatively, and Elijah felt something in his chest that had been frozen for 2 years begin to thaw. When they parted, Meredith's eyes were shining. "I have been hoping you would do that," she admitted. "I have been afraid to," Elijah confessed. "Afraid it would hurt, afraid it would feel wrong, but it does not feel wrong, Meredith. It feels like coming home." "Then welcome home," she whispered and kissed him again. They courted properly after that, by the standards of Tombstone society. Elijah called on her regularly, escorted her to church socials and community gatherings, was introduced to her students and fellow teachers. Meredith visited the ranch often, becoming friends with the other ranch hands and even the rancher's wife, Mrs. Kilpatrick, who took an immediate liking to the educated Eastern woman who was not afraid to get her hands dirty. Still, they faced whispers and judgment. Some in town thought it unseemly how quickly Elijah had moved on from his wife's death, how he was courting another woman barely 2 years after Sarah's passing. Others criticized Meredith for setting her cap at a simple ranch hand, when surely she could do better with her education and refinement. They ignored the gossip as best they could, but it stung nonetheless. It was a cold Sunday in November, nearly a year after they had first met, when Elijah brought flowers to Sarah's grave and found himself speaking to her as he always had, but with a new honesty. "I have fallen in love again, Sarah," he said quietly, kneeling beside her headstone. "I did not think it was possible, did not think my heart had room for anyone else after you. But Meredith has shown me that grief and love can coexist, that honoring your memory does not mean stopping my life." He paused, arranging the flowers carefully. "I think you would have liked her. She is strong like you were, kind like you were. She makes me want to be better, to live fully instead of just going through the motions. I hope, wherever you are, you can understand. I hope you can forgive me for moving forward. There is nothing to forgive." Elijah turned sharply to find Meredith standing a few feet away, her own flowers in hand. He had not heard her approach. She came to stand beside him, looking down at Sarah's grave. "I am sure she was wonderful," Meredith said softly, "and I am sure she would want you to be happy. Just as I am sure James would want the same for me." She knelt and placed her flowers beside Elijah's on Sarah's grave, a gesture that brought tears to his eyes. "Thank you for loving him so well," she said to the headstone, "and for teaching him how to love in the first place. Whatever happiness he can offer me is built on the foundation you laid." Elijah pulled her close, right there in the cemetery, and held her while the Arizona wind whispered through the graves around them. 2 weeks later, on a Sunday morning after their cemetery visit, Elijah took Meredith to a spot overlooking the San Pedro River Valley, where wildflowers grew in abundance despite the approaching winter. "Meredith Morrison," he said, taking her hands in his, "I know I am not a wealthy man. I cannot offer you a grand house or fine things. But I can offer you my whole heart, battered as it is, and a promise to love you fiercely for all my days. Will you marry me?" Meredith's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Elijah, I will marry you." They were wed in January of 1877 in Tombstone's small Episcopal church, with half the town in attendance despite the earlier gossip. Mrs. Kilpatrick stood up for Meredith, and the ranch foreman, Tom Murphy, stood up for Elijah. It was a simple ceremony, but heartfelt, and when Elijah kissed his bride, he felt as though he had been given an unexpected second chance at happiness. They made their home in a small house on the edge of town, close enough to the schoolhouse for Meredith to walk to work, close enough to the ranch for Elijah to ride there each morning. It was modest, just 4 rooms and a small porch, but they made it warm and welcoming together. Meredith continued teaching, which was unusual for a married woman, but Elijah supported her desire to work. She loved her students and had a gift for reaching even the most difficult children, and he would never ask her to give that up. Meanwhile, Elijah's skill with horses had earned him a promotion to head wrangler at the Double K, with a corresponding increase in pay that made their life more comfortable. They still went to the cemetery every Sunday, though now they went to pay respects to the past before returning to build their future. They brought flowers for Sarah and James, spoke to them about their week, and then went home to the life they were creating together. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. They had to learn each other's habits and quirks, had to navigate the awkwardness of physical intimacy after long periods of loneliness. There were moments when grief would resurface unexpectedly, when Elijah would wake from a dream about Sarah with tears on his face, or when Meredith would see something that reminded her of James and withdraw into sadness for days. But they learned to weather these storms together, to give each other space for grief while still offering comfort and understanding. They learned that healing was not linear, that it was possible to honor the past while embracing the present. In the spring of 1878, Meredith discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. Elijah remembered Sarah's fragile health, his fear that Meredith might suffer the same fate. Meredith remembered her own mother's difficult pregnancies, the dangers that childbirth posed to women on the frontier. But as the months passed, and Meredith remained healthy and strong, their fears gradually gave way to excitement. They prepared a nursery in one of the small rooms of their house, Elijah building a cradle with his own hands while Meredith sewed tiny clothes and blankets. Their son was born on a cold January morning in 1879, squalling and healthy with a shock of dark hair like his father. They named him James Elijah Carter, honoring both the brother and the legacy of love that had brought them together. Motherhood suited Meredith, though she found it exhausting in ways teaching had never been. She took a temporary leave from the schoolhouse to care for James, but the other teachers visited often, and the community rallied around the new family with gifts and support. Elijah was a devoted father from the start, rising in the night to walk the baby when he cried, changing diapers without complaint, singing soft lullabies in his rough cowboy's voice. Watching him with their son, Meredith fell in love with him all over again. On the first Sunday after James was born, Elijah bundled up his new family, and they made their way carefully to the cemetery. The January air was crisp but not unbearably cold, and little James was wrapped snugly against his mother's chest. At Sarah's grave, Elijah knelt with his son in his arms. "Sarah, I want you to meet James," he said softly. "He is named for Meredith's brother, but he carries your memory too in the love that made him possible. Thank you for teaching me how to love, how to be a good man. I will teach him the same." At Captain Morrison's grave, Meredith performed a similar ritual, introducing her son to the uncle he would never meet but would always hear stories about. It became their family tradition, bringing James to the cemetery every Sunday, letting him play among the wildflowers as he grew older, teaching him about the people who had come before, who had loved and lost, and made possible the life he enjoyed. James was followed by a daughter, Sarah Meredith, born in 1881, and then another son, Thomas, in 1884. Their house grew more crowded and more joyful, filled with the chaos and laughter of young children. Elijah eventually purchased a small piece of land and started his own horse training operation, building on years of experience and a growing reputation. Meredith returned to teaching part-time once the children were old enough, working with the older students in the afternoons while Elijah managed the younger ones. The years passed, marked by the rhythms of ranch life, school terms, and Sunday visits to the cemetery. The children grew healthy and strong, learning to ride almost before they could walk, learning to read from their mother's careful instruction. Tombstone changed around them too. The silver mines that had made it boom began to decline, and people started leaving for opportunities elsewhere. The lawless days of the early 1880s, the gunfight at the OK Corral and its aftermath, came and went while Elijah and Meredith focused on building their family and their business. Through it all, they remained devoted to each other and to the memory of those who had brought them together. The Sunday ritual never faltered, even when the children complained about having to spend their morning in a cemetery. Elijah and Meredith insisted it was important to remember, to honor the past that had shaped their present. It was a warm Sunday in April of 1890, 16 years after Sarah's death and 14 years after James Morrison's, when young James, now 11 years old, asked his father a question that had clearly been on his mind. "Papa, do you still miss her, Miss Sarah?" They were standing at Sarah's grave, the whole family together. Elijah looked down at his oldest son, then at his wife and other children, then back at the headstone. "I do," he said honestly. "Not the way I once did, with that sharp pain that made it hard to breathe. Now it is gentler, more like remembering a beautiful dream. She was part of making me who I am, and I will always carry her with me. But I have your mother now and you children and a life that is full and good. Sarah would have wanted that for me." "How do you know?" little Sarah asked, tugging on her father's hand. Meredith knelt down beside her daughter. "Because people who truly love us want us to be happy, even when they cannot be with us anymore. Your father loved Sarah and she loved him, and that love was real and important. But love does not run out, sweet girl. Your father had enough love for Sarah and for me and for all of you. Love multiplies, it does not divide." Young Thomas, only 6 years old, looked confused by this, but James nodded slowly, seeming to understand. As they walked back from the cemetery that day, the children running ahead to chase a jackrabbit, Elijah took Meredith's hand. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Marrying a man still so tied to the past." Meredith stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "Elijah Carter, I have never regretted a single day with you. Your capacity to love, to remain faithful even to memory, is part of what made me fall in love with you in the first place. You did not abandon Sarah when she died, you honored her. That showed me the kind of man you are, the kind of husband you would be. I have never once felt like I was competing with a ghost. I have always felt cherished." "You are cherished," Elijah said, pulling her close despite the children's giggles from up ahead. "You saved me, Meredith. I was drowning in grief, going through the motions of living without truly being alive. You threw me a rope and pulled me back to shore." "We saved each other," Meredith corrected. "I was just as lost as you were." They kissed there on the dusty road, their children making exaggerated sounds of disgust, and Elijah thought about how strange and wonderful life could be. How loss and love were intertwined in ways he never could have imagined. How a chance meeting in a cemetery had led to this, to a family and a future he had thought, was forever beyond his reach. The years continued to unfold. The children grew into young adults, each finding their own path. Young James showed his father's gift with horses and eventually took over much of the training operation. Sarah proved to be as bright as her mother and went east for further schooling, though she promised to return. Thomas, the baby, surprised everyone by becoming fascinated with medicine and apprenticing with the town doctor. Elijah and Meredith grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies wearing the marks of hard work and good living. But their love remained strong, deepened by years of partnership and shared experience. They still went to the cemetery every Sunday, though now sometimes they leaned on each other for support as they walked the familiar path. They still brought flowers for Sarah and James, still spoke to them about their lives and their children and their gratitude for the legacy of love that had brought them together. It was a Sunday in the spring of 1895 when Meredith, now 53 years old, said something that had been on her heart for a long time. "When I die," she said as they sat on the bench near Sarah's grave, "I want to be buried here near Sarah. I want us all together, you and me, Sarah and James. The four of us whose lives were so interconnected." Elijah looked at her, at the woman who had been his wife for 18 years, his partner, his love. "That seems right," he agreed. "All of us together, united by love and loss and second chances. When you come here on Sundays after I am gone," Meredith continued, "bring flowers for both of us. Tell us about the children and grandchildren, about the life that goes on. Do not stop living, Elijah, promise me that. Meredith, you are being morbid, you are healthy and strong, we have years yet. Promise me anyway," she insisted, taking his hand. "Promise me you will keep living, keep loving, keep being the wonderful man you are." "I promise," Elijah said, though the words caught in his throat, "but only if you promise the same. I intend to die first, stubborn old cowboy that I am, and I need to know you will be all right." Meredith laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet cemetery. "Then we are agreed. Whichever of us is left behind will keep living, keep bringing flowers, keep telling our story." But fate, as it turned out, had different plans. Neither of them died for many years yet. They lived to see all three children married, lived to welcome grandchildren who played among the headstones on Sunday mornings just as their parents had done. They lived to see the turn of the century, to witness the automobile and the telephone, to see the wild west of their youth become the settled southwest of their old age. Elijah and Meredith celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary in 1907, surrounded by children and grandchildren in the house that had started as a small four-room structure and had grown over the years to accommodate their expanding family. They stood together in the parlor, Elijah now 71 years old with a full white beard, Meredith 65 with her auburn hair faded to silver, and renewed their vows before their family. "I have loved you since that first Sunday in the cemetery," Elijah said, holding both her hands in his. "You brought light back into a life I thought would always be dark. You gave me children and laughter and purpose. You made me believe in second chances. And you showed me that the heart can expand to hold both grief and joy," Meredith replied, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "That honoring the past does not mean sacrificing the future. You have been my partner, my love, my home for 30 years, and I would choose you again in every life." Their oldest son, James, now 28 and with children of his own, raised a glass. "To love that endures," he said, "to second chances and Sunday flowers, to the people we have lost and the people we have found, to family." "To family," everyone echoed, and the house rang with voices and laughter and love. Elijah Carter died peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1912, at the age of 76. He had spent the day working with a young horse, came home to a dinner prepared by Meredith with help from their daughter Sarah, played with his grandchildren on the floor of the parlor despite Meredith scolding him about his old bones, and went to bed satisfied and content. By morning, he had simply slipped away, his heart finally at rest after a long and full life. Meredith was devastated but not destroyed. She had faced loss before and survived it, had learned that grief and life could coexist. At his funeral, attended by what seemed like half of Tombstone and the surrounding ranches, she spoke of a man who had loved deeply twice, who had shown her and their children what it meant to honor the past while embracing the future. They buried him in the cemetery between Sarah Carter and James Morrison, the four of them finally together as Meredith had once wished. The headstone read, Elijah Carter, beloved husband and father, 1836 to 1912. He loved well and lived fully. On the first Sunday after his death, Meredith made her way slowly to the cemetery, leaning on young James's arm. She brought 4 bunches of flowers, wildflowers because it was winter and that was all she could find, and placed them on all 4 graves, Sarah and Elijah and her brother James. Well, my love, she said, kneeling with difficulty beside Elijah's fresh grave, here we are again, you and I and Sarah and my brother all together as it should be. You kept your promise, Elijah. You lived fully, loved deeply, gave our children and grandchildren the most wonderful example of what a good man should be. She paused, wiping tears from her eyes. I will keep my promise too. I will keep living, keep telling our story until it is my time to join you. And she did. Meredith lived another 8 years, continuing to teach occasionally, spoiling her grandchildren, and making that weekly trip to the cemetery where 4 people lay who had been bound together by love and loss, and the miraculous second chances that life sometimes offered. She told their story often to anyone who would listen, about the cowboy who brought flowers to his wife's grave every Sunday until a living woman brought compassion and eventually love to him. About 2 grieving souls who found each other in a cemetery and built a life together that honored both the past and the future. About the power of love to heal, to grow, to encompass loss without being destroyed by it. When Meredith Morrison Carter died in the spring of 1920 at the age of 78, she was buried beside Elijah, completing the circle. Their children and grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren gathered to say goodbye to a woman who had taught them all about strength and grace, and the resilience of the human heart. On that first Sunday after Meredith's burial, young James Carter, now 51 years old with gray in his hair and his father's way with horses, brought flowers to all 4 graves. His own children and grandchildren came with him, 3 generations standing together in the cemetery as the morning sun warmed the Arizona desert. Grandmother always said love multiplies, it does not divide, James said to his assembled family. She and Papa proved that every day of their lives together. They never forgot the people they loved first, but they did not let grief stop them from loving again, from building a family and a legacy. He looked at his own children and grandchildren, at the life that had sprung from that chance meeting in a cemetery so many years ago. This is what they wanted us to remember. That grief is the price we pay for love, but love is always worth that price. That honoring the dead means living well, loving fully, being present for the people in our lives. The youngest great-grandchild, a girl of 5 named Sarah after both her great-grandmother and great-great-aunt, tugged on James's sleeve. Papa James, did they have a happy ending? James smiled, his father's smile, and knelt down beside her. Little Sarah, they had the happiest ending of all. They found each other when both of them thought happiness was impossible. They built a family and a life filled with love. They grew old together and died knowing they were loved. And they left behind children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carry their story forward. That is the very best kind of happy ending there is. The sun continued to rise over Boot Hill Cemetery, warming the four graves that lay side by side: Sarah Carter and Elijah Carter and James Morrison and Meredith Carter. 4 lives intertwined by loss and love, by Sunday flowers and second chances, by the stubborn refusal to let grief have the final word. And every Sunday, for generations to come, someone from the family made that walk to the cemetery, bringing flowers for all 4 graves, telling the story of the cowboy who loved his wife so much he visited her grave every week, and the remarkable woman who saw that devotion and offered him her heart, knowing that a man who could love that deeply was a man worth loving in return. Their story became legend in Tombstone, passed down through families, told to children as an example of what love should look like. Not the wild, passionate love of dime novels, but the steady, enduring love that survives loss and builds something lasting. The love that brings flowers every Sunday, that honors the past while embracing the future, that proves the human heart has a capacity far greater than we sometimes imagine. In the end, what began with a cowboy kneeling beside a grave became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the possibility of second chances, and to the truth that love, real love, never truly dies. It transforms, it grows, it adapts, but it endures, as lasting as the desert wildflowers that bloomed each spring on 4 graves in a cemetery in Tombstone, Arizona, tended by generations who never forgot the story of how their family began. The cowboy had brought flowers to her grave every Sunday, faithful in his grief, until a living woman saw that faithfulness and offered him life again. Together, they proved that the greatest love stories are not about finding perfection, but about finding someone willing to honor your past while building a future together. Someone who understands that the heart can hold both memory and hope, loss and love, grief and joy, all at the same time. And that was how Elijah Carter and Meredith Morrison taught everyone who knew them that happy endings are not about forgetting what came before, but about having the courage to write new chapters without tearing out the old ones, about bringing flowers to the past while planting seeds for the future, about loving again even when you thought your heart could not possibly have room for more. Their love story ended not with their deaths, but with the continuation of life they made possible, with the family that gathered every Sunday at those 4 graves, with the flowers that were never forgotten, and with the certainty that some kinds of love transcend death itself, transforming from one form into another, echoing through generations like a promise kept, a story told, a testament to the enduring power of the human heart to heal, to hope, and to love again.